The German army had conquered almost all of Europe in less than 2 years. Poland collapsed in weeks. France fell in just over a month. Armies that were supposed to stop Hitler were crushed with speed and precision. By late 1941, it looked like nothing could stop Nazi Germany. But then winter came. Not just cold weather. A brutal, merciless winter that froze engines, shattered morale, and exposed deadly mistakes. In December 1941, outside Moscow, Hitler faced the first true disaster of his war. And from that moment on, World War II would never be the same. If you enjoy deep cinematic history stories told in clear and simple language, make sure you like this video and subscribe to History Plus. It helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more powerful stories like this. 1. Now let's step into the snow-covered battlefield of 1941. When Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, he believed the Soviet Union would collapse within months. The invasion was massive, the largest in human history. More than 3 million German and Axis soldiers crossed into Soviet territory. Thousands of tanks rolled forward. Aircraft filled the skies. The plan was bold and aggressive. Destroy the Red Army quickly, capture key cities, and force the Soviet government to surrender before winter. At first, everything seemed to go perfectly. German forces smashed through Soviet defenses. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded and destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of Red Army soldiers were taken prisoner in giant encirclements. Cities fell one after another. The speed of the German advance shocked the world. Even some Soviet leaders feared total collapse. Hitler was confident. Many of his generals believed Moscow would fall before the end of the year. German soldiers were told they would be home by Christmas. Winter uniforms were not fully distributed because leaders assumed they would not be needed. That decision would later cost thousands of lives. But the Soviet Union was not like Western Europe. It was vast. Distances were enormous. Roads were poor. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles behind advancing troops. Fuel had to travel long routes. Spare parts became difficult to replace. The further the German army moved east, the harder it became to support them. Then came the autumn rains. The Russian landscape turned into thick mud during a season known as Rasputitsa. Tanks sank into soft ground. Trucks stalled. Horses struggled to pull wagons. The fast-moving blitzkrieg began to slow down. Still, German commanders believed this was temporary. Once the ground froze, they thought, movement would improve. They were partly right. When the ground froze, vehicles could move again. But what they did not fully understand was how extreme the cold would become. By November and early December 1941, temperatures dropped far below freezing. In some areas near Moscow, temperatures fell to -30 and even -40 degrees Fahrenheit. German equipment was not built for this. Engine oil thickened, batteries died, weapons jammed, soldiers wrapped cloth around their faces to protect against frostbite. Frostbite cases increased rapidly. Fingers and toes turned black. Medical units were overwhelmed. Horses died in the snow, cutting off vital transport. Soldiers slept in shallow holes in frozen ground because digging was nearly impossible. Fires gave little warmth against the brutal wind. Meanwhile, something important was happening inside the Soviet Union. Despite massive losses earlier in the invasion, the Red Army had not collapsed. Soviet factories had been moved east beyond the Ural Mountains, far from German bombers. Production of tanks and weapons continued. Fresh troops were being trained. Most importantly, Siberian divisions were transferred west after Soviet intelligence confirmed that Japan would not attack the Soviet Far East. These Siberian troops were experienced in winter warfare. They wore proper winter clothing. They used skis to move quickly across snow. They were prepared for conditions that German soldiers were not. German forces continued pushing toward Moscow. Some units reached the outskirts of the city. They could see church towers in the distance. It seemed like final victory was close. But exhaustion was everywhere. Supplies were limited. Cold was constant. Then, in early December 1941, everything changed. On December 5th and 6th, the Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive around Moscow. Soviet artillery opened fire across a wide front. Fresh divisions attacked weakened German positions. Ski troops appeared suddenly in forests and struck supply lines. Tanks adapted for winter conditions pushed forward. The German army was shocked. After months of advancing, they were now being forced backward. Units that had expected to capture Moscow were suddenly fighting to survive. Communication lines were strained. Supplies were low. Many soldiers were already weakened by cold and exhaustion. Hitler reacted with anger. He refused to allow retreat. He believed holding positions would stabilize the front. He ordered his troops to stand fast, no step back. Some generals disagreed. They believed a controlled withdrawal to shorter defensive lines would save the army. But Hitler's orders were clear, and so German units remained in exposed positions under constant pressure. This decision marked a turning point. The winter did not destroy the German army completely, but it stopped it. For the first time in the war, large German formations were pushed back. The myth of unstoppable blitzkrieg cracked in the snow. The psychological impact was enormous. Across Europe and beyond, people saw that Germany could be halted. The Red Army had survived the initial storm. Now it was striking back. December 1941 was not just about freezing temperatures. It was about overconfidence, miscalculation, and underestimating an enemy's ability to endure. It was about leadership decisions that ignored reality. And it was about a war that was supposed to end quickly, but had just become much longer and much deadlier. In the next part, we'll go deeper into Hitler's reaction, the growing conflict between him and his generals, and how this winter disaster reshaped the entire Eastern Front. Stay with History Plus. The snow has only begun to fall. As the Red Army pushed forward, the pressure inside German headquarters began to rise. Reports from the front were no longer filled with victories. They spoke of retreat, frozen equipment, and exhausted men. Generals on the ground could clearly see the danger. Their units were stretched thin, undersupplied, and suffering from extreme cold. But in Berlin, Hitler refused to believe that the situation was slipping out of control. He issued strict no-retreat orders. German forces were told to hold their positions at all costs. The idea was simple. If soldiers stayed firm, the line would stabilize. But reality on the battlefield was far more brutal. Many positions were exposed. Defensive lines were incomplete. Frozen ground made digging. Proper trenches nearly impossible. Soldiers fought while standing in shallow snow pits, barely protected from Soviet artillery. Some commanders argued that pulling back to shorter, stronger defensive lines would prevent disaster. They believed flexibility had always been one of Germany's strengths. But Hitler saw retreat as weakness. He feared that once soldiers started moving backward, panic would spread. Meanwhile, the Red Army grew stronger with each passing week. Fresh troops continued arriving. Soviet commanders improved coordination between infantry, tanks, and artillery. They did not just attack blindly. They targeted weak points, supply lines, and isolated units. German forces that had once moved with speed now struggled just to maintain communication. Morale shifted on both sides. Soviet soldiers gained confidence. They had defended Moscow. They had pushed the enemy back. German soldiers, for the first time in the war, began to understand that this would not be a quick victory. Letters home changed tone. Optimism turned into endurance. By the end of December 1941, German forces had been pushed back dozens of miles in several sectors. It was not a total collapse, but it was a clear strategic failure. Operation Barbarossa had not achieved its main goal. The Soviet Union was still standing. Moscow had not fallen. And perhaps most importantly, time was no longer working in Germany's favor. In Part 3, we will look at how this winter disaster changed Hitler's leadership style, how command tensions deepened, and why this moment shaped the brutal battles that followed in 1942. Stay with History Plus. The consequences of this winter are only beginning to unfold. After the shock of the winter counteroffensive, something inside Hitler shifted. Until this point, his bold decisions had brought rapid victories. Risk-taking had worked in Poland, France, and the Balkans. But outside Moscow, that confidence collided with reality. Instead of accepting mistakes, Hitler responded by tightening his grip on the army. Several senior generals who recommended tactical withdrawals were removed from their positions. Others were sidelined. Hitler began interfering more directly in battlefield decisions, often overriding experienced commanders who understood conditions on the ground better than anyone in Berlin. This change damaged the flexibility that had once made the German army so effective. German officers became cautious about disagreeing. Some followed orders they privately believed were dangerous. The culture of open military debate weakened. Strategic planning became more rigid. And on a massive front stretching thousands of miles, rigidity was dangerous. On the Soviet side, leadership also evolved. Earlier in the war, Stalin had made severe mistakes by ignoring warnings and limiting his generals. But after the defense of Moscow, he began allowing more operational freedom to capable commanders. Generals like Georgy Zhukov gained greater authority. Coordination improved. Soviet forces adapted faster to battlefield realities. This difference in leadership style would shape the war's future. The winter of 1941-42 did not end the fighting. Once spring arrived, Germany prepared for new offensives. But the goal had changed. Instead of a quick knockout blow, the war in the East became a long, grinding struggle of resources, production, and endurance. German industry now faced a powerful opponent that was rebuilding rapidly. Soviet factories east of the Ural Mountains were producing tanks in huge numbers. American support through the Lend-Lease program began increasing. Trucks, food supplies, and materials flowed into the Soviet Union. The balance of power was slowly shifting. For German soldiers, the illusion of a short campaign was gone. Many understood they were now fighting in a war without a clear end. Morale did not collapse, but it hardened. Survival replaced confidence. Most historians agree on one key point. December 1941 marked the first major strategic failure for Hitler in World War II. The German army was not destroyed, but it was stopped. And being stopped changed everything. In the final part, we'll examine how this winter disaster shaped the brutal battles of 1942 and why this moment is still considered one of the most decisive turning points of the entire war. Stay with History Plus. The final chapter is coming when the snow finally began to melt in early 1942. The battlefield outside Moscow looked quiet compared to the chaos of December. But beneath that silence was a powerful truth. Hitler's plan for a fast and decisive victory in the Soviet Union had failed. Germany had not been destroyed. Its army was still dangerous. But the idea of a quick war in the East was gone forever. The winter disaster exposed serious weaknesses: overconfidence, poor preparation for extreme weather, stretched supply lines, and leadership decisions that ignored battlefield reality. In 1942, Germany would try again. New offensives were launched toward the south, aiming for oil fields and the city of Stalingrad. But the momentum of 1941 never fully returned. The war had changed. It was no longer about rapid breakthroughs. It became a brutal war of attrition, where industry, manpower, and endurance would decide the outcome. The Red Army had survived the storm. More than that, it had proven it could push back. That psychological shift mattered just as much as territory. Across Europe and around the world, people saw that Nazi Germany could be stopped. December 1941 did not end World War II, but it marked the beginning of a long reversal. The winter did not win the war alone. Soviet resilience, industrial relocation, leadership adjustments, and Germany's strategic mistakes all played critical roles. Together, they created the shock that changed everything. That is why historians still look at Hitler's winter disaster as one of the most decisive turning points of the entire conflict. If you found this breakdown clear and helpful, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Do you think Germany could have avoided this disaster with better planning? Drop your opinion in the comments. Your perspective matters. And if you know someone who loves military history, share this video with them. Make sure you're subscribed to History Plus so you don't miss our next deep dive into the battles that shaped the world. The snow outside Moscow did more than freeze an army. It froze an illusion, And once that illusion shattered, the course of World War II was changed. Forever. I'll see you in the next one.